Thank you very much for tuning in to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. I am your host, Robert Scrobe. Today we're featuring the amazing, and I do mean amazing, Adrienne Guillory. She is the Senior Lead User Experience Research Specialist and Design Thinking Facilitator at AT&T here in Dallas. I've known Adrienne for approximately 7 years, ever since she got her start at Usability Sciences, and since then she's come a long way. She did some human factors work and research at Sabre. She's done work with User Experience Professionals Association and AIGA. She's done a number of panels. She's on board to do some more in January. She's a mentor. She's a design sprint facilitator. I mean, she's multifaceted, multi-talented, and I am thrilled that she's on today's show. Give it a listen. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you on the other side. Adrienne, welcome to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast.
Thank you, Robert. I'm so excited.
I've been looking forward to talking to you for a long time. Actually, I talked to you quite a bit, but I mean officially in some sort of manner where you're not the person doing the interviews on the user research side. There's actually somebody else talking to you going, hey there, what are you all about? How are you doing? That kind of deal. So for the
this will take some getting used to.
Yeah, it's okay. You're gonna get more of that for sure. So for the uninitiated, for those who don't know Adrienne, I'll preface everything I'm going to say by saying that I am uniquely biased in terms of how I see her from a professional standpoint. She's basically someone who's been doing research for quite a long time. She's been recently doing design thinking facilitation. She's been involved with AIGA, UXPA, which is, what does AIGA stand for? It's like, I forget. What's the official?
I don't know. I don't remember what the official verbiage is. I just think it's really cool.
Okay, that's fine. I know it's AIGA and then User Experience Professional Association. You've presented at multiple conferences. You've done a lot of work. And right now you're at AT&T. You're doing both design thinking facilitation and sprinkling there with a little bit of research. So give an overview of what kind of work you're currently involved with and what you're doing there at AT&T.
Absolutely. So here I work on a design technology team. That's what we're called here. And it's reminding AT&T that there are humans in all of these experiences. So everyone on our team, we have designers, we have researchers, front-end developers, content strategists. We have the whole gamut who work from a human-centered design perspective, right? In addition to that, I work on a team that is specifically targeted towards design thinking in the sense of education. So, putting people through these experiences so that they learn how to do these activities and take them back, as well as, innovative problem solving. Mm-hmm. So my role here was to more or less stand up kind of how research works in this very constrained time frame. That was initially what I was brought in to do. Since then, thanks to, all the work you and I used to do at Sabre, I also kind of brought in the elements of design thinking facilitation.
And as you've been maturing with that, as you've been doing more of it within AT&T, what are some of the activities that you've been really concentrating on that have been appealing to you or that you've really found value?
So, there are a lot of books out there that talk about the activities, but it's not until you're actually doing it in practice that you realize some activities are just hard for your participants to grasp. So, when you're thinking about working at AT&T, this huge enterprise where the average tenure of an employee is somewhere between 19 and 22 years, everything that comes out of my mouth is foreign. So I've relied heavily on identifying activities that we can do. I call them primer activities that are fun and engaging, but teach the behavior we want them to use. For example, you have the element of brainstorming. In a lot of big organizations, brainstorming is somebody saying an idea, somebody else immediately shutting them down. We play a game called the ad game where someone has to give an idea and then everyone else has to help sell that idea using yes and, right? So we do that, and it's fun and it's engaging. Everybody loves it. And then when you get into ideating and you hear someone try to shut somebody down, everyone else in the group will say no, yes, and right, and kind of keep that momentum going so that we can truly ideate in a safe space. So I love activities. I'm always looking for more activities like that to teach the behavior I want to see in that part of the workshop.
And if I'm understanding the activity, it sounds like one of the foundations of it is inclusion, where you're making sure that different voices are heard early on, and that cadence around valuing other opinions and other perspectives becomes the norm, like something you move forward with as part of your workshop activity.
Absolutely. Inclusion and culture, which is another thing that I like to tackle from a design thinking perspective. You know, you have to create the space where people feel that that's comfortable. And, you know, today in an environment, people don't feel comfortable saying, you know what, that's a good idea, let me add to it, due to competition, other perceptions that may weigh negatively, then they're hesitant to add to. So we create that space. I intentionally want you to take this back from a culture perspective. So inclusion and culture.
Yeah, and working with you for as long as I have, and we've when you think about it, we've been working with each other for a long time. I mean, we originally knew each other back in usability sciences days when you were doing pure research and kind of viewing things from a two-way mirror, all the way into when we crossed paths in Sabre. You've always had the inclination to make sure that other points of view are being heard, or to explore those other points of view and get people involved as part of any particular process you were involved with us. So that's been one of the hallmarks in regards to what I've experienced working with you. And that's probably a good question to bounce off of is, with your research background, how have you seen some of the things that you've done in that discipline kind of blending into what you do with design thinking facilitation?
You know, I get that question a lot because, you know, researchers were thought of as, you know, very introverted and not necessarily, you know, kind of out in the open. And, you know, Robert, you've seen me facilitate, so, you know, I'm everything but that when I facilitate.
You are not introverted at all.
Everything but
let's
that.
make sure that's in the recording. Maybe you're introverted and like maybe 5% of the time in there's certain situations, but absolutely.
But, you know, especially when I'm talking to researchers, I liken it to running a focus group, right? So, you know, and the same things that you need to run a successful focus group, you need for design thinking workshop. You need the right people in the room. You need to be able to bring them together based on a specific need, right? Or a need or a desire or want something. And then you need to manage personalities. So, you know, when I think about it, I learned the core of how to facilitate as a researcher doing focus groups. You add into, and this is what I love most about design thinking, is you add into that I need all of these stakeholders at the table, right? And why do I believe that so much? Because, you know, when I started, research didn't have a seat at the table. Design was not what we call design now. So I know, just like developers, you know, probably feel we need to be at that table. So then I can speak from that passionately when I do a design thinking around inclusion, having the right people, managing personalities, hearing it from the user perspective. It's everything I've been doing and fussing about in a room with 2 or 3 people on the big screen, you know, with 15 or 20 people. It's my mind. It's a lot of the same elements, just kind of packaged a little bit differently.
Yeah, and whenever you bring a researcher or a developer into the conversation, a higher level conversation, whether it's like on a project level or a strategy level, with a little bit of, especially for the uninitiated, for a little bit of introduction, it's a good way of getting to know what kind of discussions happen at those levels and teaching them how to contribute in a meaningful way so that you communicate from either a researcher or developer perspective your concerns, your information in a way that's digestible from those folks at those tiers. More often than not, the default is that people are seen as production work. So there's this notion that you're just part of the process to deliver the deliverable or to give perspective on something they need to make a decision on. When really, if there's a greater conversation around the work and what it means and how it impacts a lot of strategic aspects of the business, there's much more value that goes into that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things we talk about and I bring up in those workshops is how we tend to make assumptions. When we're kind of siloed that way, everybody is assuming somebody did the groundwork. Somebody made sure this was the right direction. Somebody validated the problem. But if we're all together in that space, we can say, did we do that? Okay, so now we're not necessarily having to assume. We can speak freely at the table together and make sure we're moving in the right direction.
And it reminds me of the design sprint work that you did early on when you were facilitating, especially with some of the stuff you did in Sabre. Beyond the orientation that you had with some of the team members that were involved, you frequently not only took command of the group in terms of facilitation and kind of showing people the way, but you had this very unique ability that I still mention to this date of a classic example of somebody that, because they know the participants very well, can call audibles that seem to sync very well with the group. So in the case of I'm going to use names that our audience won't know, but like with Cindy's group, when we're working with a core group of developers, it was what was really interesting to see is that they were on board with, okay, we've kind of done this. Now I think we should move in this direction. What do you all think? But you didn't do it primarily on the process level. You did it because I think you understood the perspective and the nature of each of the participants in such a way so that a typical design sprint takes either 4 or 5 days. You were pretty much almost set at day 3 with the prototype, if I recall from that particular instance. Mm-hmm. So it speaks to your innate ability, what you're talking about, to understand not only the perspectives of the people involved, but to really give them a voice to have them participate effectively.
So that's something that I learned early on. I tell people I don't want to go into one of those workshops, activities, without knowing kind of the perspectives of my stakeholders. So just like I do research on my end users and, my customers and know what they need and what they're looking for and their frustrations, I do the same thing to my stakeholders. So when I go in there to present, I'm using the words that my stakeholders used. I'm understanding their pain points, and I can bring that up in a conversation, like you said, just kind of on the fly. Well, I remember from a conversation you told me you needed X, Y, and Z. Have we covered that here? Have we put that on the table? Have you shared that with the group? It may not always be that direct. It may be, I'm going to say it, and if you want to agree with me in public, you can. If not, I've still shared your perspective. So those stakeholder interviews and understanding the personalities and the needs of the people who are going to be in those activities with you is the difference between a good workshop and not, in my opinion.
I agree with that. So kind of dovetailing into mentoring, I know that recently I've been hearing you more talk about this topic, about how it's important to you, not only at the professional level, but also at the collegiate level. Can you kind of go into a little bit about the kind of work you're doing in that space?
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with why that's so important to me. Okay. So when I came up, when I started kind of in this specifically research, I didn't necessarily have a lot of people that I could go talk to about, what does that mean and what does that look like? I had to kind of learn, usability sciences that you brought up earlier. That was my first corporate job, right? And there were a lot of things happening, and I had no idea what was happening. I was fortunate in the sense that I grew up. I grew up with other analysts who were able to kind of pour into me, and I didn't have to necessarily go that far, but to look for help. But there were still some things that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable talking to those people about. So, my last few years has been around making myself available to somebody who just has what they may think is a stupid question, or they want to be able to talk to somebody or talk through, a situation, a question, a job offer, with someone who doesn't have a stake in the game, but can have insights to share with them the things to consider, bringing those things that might be in their blind spot to the forefront. So I say all of that to say, so today I mentor young ladies at the high school level. So we're talking about young ladies who are probably the first in their families to go to college, right? So if we all remember how difficult that was and how overwhelming that was. So that's one role. Let's talk about where you want to be and what do you want to do. I wish to this day somebody told me that first C I got in college algebra was not the end of the world, before I dropped the class and wasted all that money. So I'm trying to help prevent things like that. On the collegiate level, you have, now that everybody's so excited about user experience research and we know what that is, and we have a lot of programs out there, you still have, students who they see it, but they don't quite know what to do with it, and need to have a perspective from a professional. So I do that. And then we have, designers who weren't necessarily user experience designers, right? They can make things, but they haven't always had insights to rely on. So helping them kind of understand how to take those insights and use them, as well as, other professionals who are like, hey, Adrienne, I'm getting bored at work. What can I do? What should I be doing? Or I'm having problems with, some of the processes. What would you do in this situation? So it's basically just giving people an opportunity to talk without feeling judged. They can go back and make whatever decisions they choose to make, but it just helps to have somebody to be a sounding board, kind of like you are to me. I'm re-Roberting.
Yeah.
I'm re-Roberting.
Okay. How much of when you kind of counsel youth on like what their situations are and kind of what they go through, how much of that kind of correlates to self-awareness and being and kind of discovering who they are as at their center and what makes them unique? How have you kind of approached self-awareness with them?
So, you ask them questions about them. What are you trying to do? Right. So, when people tell me they want to be a researcher, why? What is it about research that you think you're interested in? Have you done any research on the day in the life of whatever that role is? Does that pair well with you? So if someone's like, I hate reading. Okay, well then you don't really want to be a researcher. That's not what you want to do.
Right.
So, really telling them, when you get into a job like the ones we have now, it's not as much variety all the time. And if you haven't gotten the insight you need to make sure that that is a good fit for you, then I recommend you take a little bit more time and do some digging before you just jump into it, because that may not change as quickly as you'd like it to change. And really, driving in, this is a decision you're making, at least for the next 2 to 3 years. So, yeah.
Do you think it's a well, let me phrase this a different way. How, if someone that you're mentoring is thinking about taking some bold risks versus kind of being conservative, do you consider the person's nature before answering the question, or do you just kind of want to explore more and see where they go with things?
So when we talk about risk, I ask them, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to lose? And really, have a tendency to kind of get it all the way down to basically, so if you take that risk and X, Y, and Z happens, how are you going to react? So I don't believe in sugarcoating. I think it's important for people to really know the end of the story and what could happen. So I'm not opposed to, hey, you make the decision, right? It doesn't have to be this, but this is what could happen, and are you okay with that?
Mm. Now, how does that correlate? Well, not necessarily risk-taking, but how does your mentoring and working with different people, whether they're professionals or high school grads or high school or in junior high and stuff, how does that correlate with your own philosophy around parenting? Is there a parallel there, or do you take any lessons from your parenting, the way that you're kind of handling things at home, or do you see them as two separate tracks altogether?
Parenting, that is a whole nother thing there. I do think that they're a lot alike. So I say that in the sense that, I may talk to people, I may, have some of these mentoring sessions, and they don't necessarily take my advice. And I can see that it's probably not going to end well. Do the same thing with my son. I can probably see that's not going to end well. But if we've talked about the risk and, you've had an opportunity to make that decision, in some cases, I'm just going to let you make it. But that said, I will still be here if you want to talk about it, and I'm not going to pass judgment. So I've learned that from my son. He won't take information from me if it's I told you so, or do this or nothing, or, whatever that kind of sternness is. I'm going to tell you what you need to know so that you can make an informed decision. But if you choose to do something else, or it doesn't quite work out the way you intended it to, we can go back to the drawing board together, and that's fine.
Yeah, and with my own son, it's a lot of collaboration, but he's much younger than yours, I believe. My own son is 6, and he'll do a lot of information seeking, and then he'll try something, and then if it works or doesn't work, he'll try to get some feedback after the fact. Sometimes it's in a school environment, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But like yourself, I've always taken the approach that they just have to understand the risks that they're taking, what some of the consequences are if they decide to do certain things, and to basically empower them to make their own decisions. And I think it probably entails that particular point correlates a lot to what I do with mentoring, is that I just try to give as much perspective and information for folks to try to make their own decisions around which way they should go. Because ultimately, that's what needs to be done. They're in their own head. They know what they're after. You really have to just set the stage for them and help them kind of go in a certain direction.
One of the things that I've learned from you and that I appreciate, and I've also taken into mentoring, is, planting a seed of have you considered, and getting people to think outside of the box sometimes. Mm-hmm. So, what I do today as a researcher, I don't know anybody pictured that for me 13 years ago. I don't know. And I know I didn't picture that for myself because I didn't even know this thing existed. Mm-hmm. But it's always been trying new things, right? Let's stretch. Make sure you stretch. You always need to be looking for an opportunity to grow. So even if you're walking into something that you don't know a whole lot about, if you're dedicated to learning that, and really taking that experience on, that it could be oftentimes very rewarding. So, there's a lot of conversation about consider this, think about that, stretch yourself, as well as these are the risks involved.
It's understanding the nature of who somebody is. Like especially with you, it seemed like your professional role didn't match your potential. There were just certain things that, whether it was like elaborating on strengths or looking at your goals or just talking with who you were, and knowing and seeing the interactions just from an observer's perspective, when you talk to people in marketing, you talk to sales, you talk to just a wide variety of different people, that there seemed to be so much potential. But it was the notion of just setting you on the path to trying different things, to tasting things, to experimenting, like to your point, and seeing what works, what doesn't work. You have never been one to say verbally when something doesn't work. You're like, literally, it's the shortest sentence I've ever gotten from you ever, when you're like, no, I'm not doing that. And it's not even a starter conversation. It's just, I recognize immediately because the tone changes, and I go, oh, that's fine. We'll just move on to the next thing. So you've been pretty clear with me when we were together on where you can stretch and where you cannot.
What's funny though, Robert, is I was laughing about that because that's exactly what someone was telling me earlier. They know I'm serious and I mean it, right? When I say no, I'm just not doing that. You have to know which battles to fight and pick, right? There are some things that I can already say, you know what, that's not for me, mm-hmm. right? Professionally, personally, even some of the projects that come to me, it's like, that's not going to work. That's not for me. And again, going back to self-awareness, I have to be okay with that. There was a time when, I would work myself to death, literally 70, 80 hours a week trying to make things work that were,
yep.
And it was never intended to work. Mm-hmm. So part of it was me kind of taking a step back. Is this me being a control freak? right? Or is there really opportunity here? I just need to find it, and being able to differentiate the two.
And it's never a snap decision. It's something that has to take a lot of time for you to consider, like to give yourself time to really consider your options and really consider what's right for you. I know a lot of what I've tried to attempt to do as a manager was to kind of say, here's a potential path, let's go for it. But I didn't adopt the risk that other people had by doing those particular things and not understanding the ramifications of trying a particular path. So it was through a couple of people and yourself that I applied patience and said, okay, when you're ready, you're going to be ready. And I imagine with mentoring, it's the same thing. You can feed them perspective, but they'll self-affirm when they feel, okay, I kind of want to try this. And then you just kind of walk the path with them. Yeah. So what do you have lined up for 2019? What is on Adrienne Guillory's wish list for things that she's going to be involved with coming into the new year?
So for 2019, going back to kind of the opportunities I see for facilitation, I'd like to put together some meetups, some groups, and maybe even do some writing, some presentations on better facilitation in general. There are some things that are not, like I said, not in those books about commanding a room and being almost militant with process, in a sense, in some regards, but then also kind of assessing where the group is and saying, you know what, I know we did this activity, but they're not where I need them to be. So we're going to do another activity. And taking things out and moving things around. You do that on the fly. You know, some of the reading material makes it sound like everything just goes in order and flows, and that's not real life. So I see an opportunity to do that there. I also am going to continue working with some of these youth organizations around esteem and how do we encourage youth to think outside the box completely. You know, you can be a designer, you can be a researcher. If you want, you can be an amazing dancer. Those are not stories that we were telling kids when I came out of school. We weren't telling kids that 10 years ago. So, you know, especially I do that partially because I think that's important for those kids, but it's also important for my son. You know, my son asked me a couple months ago, Mommy, am I a jock or a nerd? I was like, baby, you can be both, right? you can do all of that.
You'd be a jock.
Yeah, right. So, you know, expanding kind of how he thinks about things and how he sees himself in the world, and doing this with other kids.
It's interesting because I found that maybe this is going to be just me getting older, but I really appreciate almost the unique view of the young and the youth, because they're eventually going to take over things and they have their own ideas. But it's giving them a platform to at least speak their mind first, even if it's with limited information. Because I've learned over the years that I'm never too old to learn something new, or to take in a different perspective other than my own. Like, just because I've been on the planet for 40 plus years doesn't make me the authority on a lot of topics, especially when things are moving so fast. I think if nothing else, my role is to basically be there as like a person that can, similar to management, take shields from certain people from certain things that come up and give them a space to feel safe to experiment and to try different things. If I can provide that, especially for people that need it, and I don't overreach, then I think I'm in a good place. But it is tricky because every person is going to be unique depending on who comes to you for help or comes to you for perspective. So you just have to kind of, dance that fine line.
Absolutely.
So anything else? Are you going to be doing any involved work with UXPA, with some of your outreach? Are you going to be more involved in the social realm? Are you going to get
more involved in the social realm? I laugh at more involved in the social realm. I don't even know how that would be possible, Robert. No, so I haven't planned out all of 2019 yet. I understand I have a couple of speaking engagements early part of 2019. And that's pretty much as far as I've gotten for the year. Some of the stuff moves so fast, so we'll see what happens. As far as kind of socially, I still think it's partially kind of my responsibility to lead by example. So, when I talk about going to networking events, I always tell people, first, I encourage us to come. If you know nobody else, then you know me, right? Either through LinkedIn or we may know some of the same people. So if you're nervous about that, come hang out with me. I'm good. I'm a nice person, I think. And then getting them there and then encouraging them. I tell everybody, when you network, if it's not something you're comfortable with, force yourself to meet 3 people. And, I'm not waiting until you need a job, right? It's all about relationship building. I've shared this with you. I don't know. I have not necessarily applied for a job in 13 years, right? Just, I went and found that job online. It's people that I've met along the way that when something came open, they thought of me and, kind of help get my foot in the door. So I tell people, you cannot discount that. And it becomes easier. So from a social perspective, it's going to still be getting out here and trying to kind of influence people to do the same. But I don't know if I'm going to be as busy as I was doing this year. I think I averaged 2 speaking engagements a year or a month, Robert. So we might slow down just a little bit. We might slow down just a little bit.
Just a tad. So I have a wish or a request that I would be willing to help you with, but I think would be phenomenal for you. And in that, and again, I predated this or pre-said that I'm a bit biased because we've been working together for a long time. I would love to see you do a video blog. And by that, I mean not creating content like you would instructional content, but documenting your day-to-day, not even probably from a family perspective, from a professional perspective. I find that between all of the interactions you have professionally with other people of different disciplines, you have the ability to capture attention in video that is on par with some of the other folks I know that do video blogging for a living. And it could be an experiment where you just do it 3 or 4 times. You fire up Facebook Live, or you try YouTube and just do a Q&A. But you would light up the world. I would love to see it like in the spring or the summer where you have some time, just basically just putting it up and seeing what the reaction is. And I would love to see it. And especially since I know that you're super busy with everything, whether it's engagements outside of work or family life. You're pretty, the bandwidth for you is, I'm lucky to get a half an hour of your time on a Friday when we just want to sync on a monthly basis because you have a lot of responsibilities on your shoulders. But that's one dimension of it where if it was a 5 to 10 minute kind of quick kind of video explaining what you're about to do, I'm about to go on stage at UXPA to do this. I just think it would be highly engaging. So if that was a wish I could put on your plate for next year sometime, I'd like to see that come from your camp.
I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. We'll have to talk about that. I mean, it's not fair that you kind of asked me in the podcast, right? But we could definitely think about that. No, I love that idea, Robert. I really like that idea. It partners well with some other things that I was kind of thinking about. So yeah, let's touch base on that. Let's figure out what that would look like.
Deal. I'll sign myself up
awesome.
for a little bit of support on that one.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So if people wanted to check you out online, where would they go?
I have a few followers on LinkedIn. So it's Adrienne Guillory. If there's a lot of us apparently, so just do Adrienne Guillory at AT&T. And then on Twitter, and, I apologize because I had to come up with this Twitter name like literally before going on stage one time. So I think it's like UX_diva on Twitter.
Impressive.
You can follow me there. And those are 2 kind of the primary, I get a lot of inboxes in LinkedIn. And we can, if you need 15, 20 minutes just to talk, say hello, ask some questions, we can always set that up. And that's how to find me.
How do you usually broadcast when you're going to be taking part in some panel talks or other speaking engagements? I normally see those on LinkedIn, but do you post those anywhere else?
No, so I post them on LinkedIn, and I don't know when this happened, but LinkedIn now tells Twitter what I'm doing. So apparently it shows up on LinkedIn and Twitter. Depending on, kind of who the audience is, I may sometimes post that on my Facebook page and some of those professional groups, but typically it's just those two right now.
Okay, great. Well, Adrienne, it was wonderful talking to you again, and I'm sure we're going to speak again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Robert. I enjoyed it. I hope your followers enjoy it as well.
I hope so too. I'm sure they will. But thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. If you have a question or comment about what you heard on today's show, email me direct at robert@dallasdesignsprints.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.